Good evening and welcome to Born Loved. My name's Tim and I'm going to be your host for this evening. Born Love Week is a week of talks inviting every student at Oxford University to explore their identity and explore the identity that Jesus offers. This evening, Rico Tice, who works for a big church in London, is going to be preaching this evening. Rico is going to be speaking from the Gospel of Luke, which is one of the biographies of Jesus. And he's going to be speaking on the topic, Two Perspectives and True Success, which is from Luke 13. After Rico has spoken, we will hear from an Oxford student who has experienced for themselves the new identity that Jesus offers, following which Rico will host a question and answer panel to address any questions you might have concerning the talk. At 9:15, we'll wrap things up, and then we'll pass, and then you're free to go. I'm now going to pass it on to Rico, and let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you very much for having me this evening. I wonder if you would turn in these little Luke's Gospels in front of you. So we're going to be looking at the biographies of Jesus unashamedly and seeing what they have to say. And I wonder if you turn to page 62. No, on from that, so I've got that wrong. That's another passage I want to look at. Page 88. Page 88, so that's Luke chapter 12 in these little books. Just to say, as we look at this passage, the reason I've chosen it is that when I was raised, the subject that comes up in this passage was never broached with me. And as I look back, that was a dreadful omission from the people who raised me, who I know loved me, but they just didn't raise this issue. So I'm raising it because I felt it was a dreadful omission until at 16 I was torpedoed by the issue. The second thing is that I do think that if people care for me, they'd speak straight to me. So I hope that you'll say as you come this week, as you come tonight, well, there wasn't any spin. He just tried to be, the fatty at the front. He tried to tell me straight. And I hope that you'll feel that. And I do detest it when people withhold information from me. I find that pastorally in my work, it happens a lot. And you can't make wise decisions if people withhold information. So I hope tonight you'll feel, well, that he was straight, he told us straight. And in this parable of Jesus, it couldn't be straighter. So I wonder what you make of it. There's a chance, obviously, for questions later on. There's a chance to get into groups and ask questions. I'm sure this parable will raise those questions. So let me go straight to this parable, which is a story with a spiritual cutting edge taught by Jesus there on page 88. And he says this. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" Then he said to them, "Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in the abundance of possessions." And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "This is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I'll store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you've plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. But God, this very night life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you've prepared for yourself? And over the... This is how it'll be. Well, let me say a prayer. If you've got a mobile, you may want to just flick it off for a moment. That would be good. If the mobile goes off during the talk, you'll be taken out and stoned. Apart from that, we'll be fine. So if you've got a mobile, that would be good. And it's my custom to say a short prayer. Please bear with me as I say it now. Father God, please do speak to us in the very depths of our being now. We thank you for the Bible. Just pray that actually what we hear tonight, we'd never forget. Amen. Well, I don't know what's wrong with me, but I find myself constantly reading the most inane material. I do hope your reading time is spelt more profitably than mine. But here, for example, is something I read recently. It's a list of lost property that was handed in at British Rail depots a couple of years ago. Anyone read that? Yeah, I thought I might be the only one. And at the top of the list, to my amazement, was a human brain that was apparently left by a medical student on an away day. I don't know what you make of that. That may well be the ultimate in absent-mindedness, I'm not sure. But the other things on the list included a pair of stuffed gerbils, a glass eye, a motorcycle and a wooden leg. And the mind boggles as to whether the same person left them all on the train. Well, by contrast, and again, thank you for making time to come for this hour this evening. I'd like you to do a small exercise for me and use your minds. Henry Ford said, thinking is probably the hardest work there is, which is the probable reason why so few of us engage in it. But could you put your mind to this question this evening? Here's the question. Do you think that you're a successful person? Do you think you're a successful person? And I'm not saying have you been in the past, or do you think you will be in the future, but right now, would you consider yourself successful? And I suppose as we think about that, there'll be a whole range of answers. Some people would be fairly certain they are successful. They'd say, well, I am. I really am. Others have been put down so often recently that suddenly they've lost their confidence and they'd say, well, look, I'm not sure I am. I thought I was a couple of years ago. I'm not so sure now. I've lost a bit of confidence. Most of us, I guess, would be mucking around somewhere in the middle. My older brother was always incredibly successful. He was head boy at school. He was captain of everything. I nearly put on my aquaform when I applied to university. I was his brother. Well, there comes, but I mean, I guess as we think about it, the question is, as I've asked you that question, is what constitutes success as far as you're concerned? As far as you're concerned, what constitutes it? And there comes before us in this parable, this story with a spiritual cutting edge that Jesus tells here, a man who would have been considered from almost every angle successful, and yet, can you see God's judgment on him in verse 20? Because God's judgment on him is that he is a dismal failure, failure. Have a look at verse 20, down at the bottom there. But God said to him, you fool. What an... This is the funeral card of my best friend from university. In fact, he made this top that I'm working. He was sort of interested in clothing stuff, and we played rugby together. He produced these. Sorry, just nailed it. And he died of a pulmonary embolism, utterly, an utter shock, totally suddenly. I was speaking, rang me at this college I was in Delhi. I'll never forget it. And I took his funeral, and his 3 kids were standing at the back of the coffin. And then about a year after I took his funeral, I went to his graveside with his father. I was visiting them, and his father pointed at his own son's grave in tears, and he said, as he pointed at the grave, he said, what epitaph? What words do I put on his grave, Rico? My son, what do I put on his grave? Through the tears. It wasn't a great moment, and I just didn't know what to say. Well, interestingly, there's no question about the epitaph here. You fool, 2 words. And in the Greek, the word for fool is literally without thought. So it's not that this guy didn't think. He did. He made plans. He sat down. He thought and thought and thought. But actually, the point Jesus makes here is he didn't think about the right things. He didn't think about the really important things in life. If you want to get inside someone's thinking, ask them about their daydreams and their nightmares. This guy had them and they drove him, but he didn't get to the right things. So I wonder if we can think about the things that constitute success and failure in this story. It is a striking story. It had to be. For the first 12 verses of this parable, of this chapter, Jesus has been talking about eternity. The Bible says God has put eternity into our hearts. So in our hearts there is this longing for eternity. It's not just this life. There's something there. There's never enough time in this life. And people are riveted, and it is extraordinary stuff as he talks about eternity. I mean, just have a look back with me. Can you? Verse 2, it's like Gladiator. Maximus, what we do in life echoes in eternity. Verse 2, there's nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known. Verse 2 on page 86. And then verse 5, I mean, absolutely brutal. It's not boring, whatever else it is. But I'll show you whom you should fear. Fear him who after your body has been killed has authority to throw you into hell. My goodness. And then verse 8, back over the page, I tell you, whoever publicly acknowledges me before others, the Son of Man will also acknowledge before the angels of God. Eternity, eternity, eternity. And then suddenly in this, bang, there's a massive interruption. And a guy in the crowd shouts out, will you stop going on about this spiritual stuff? There's a recession on. Get real. This doesn't put bread on the table. So this guy shouts out, can you see, have a look down there, verse 13. Someone in the crowd said to him, teacher, tell my wretched brother to divide the inheritance with me. It doesn't say wretched, I put that in, but I think that's what he means. Forget about God. Forget about eternity. That's not the real world. Will you get real? And here are 2 brothers falling out over the will. You know that phrase, don't you? Where there's a will, there's a family. That's what's happening here, isn't it? And two brothers are falling out for good over money, over who's going to get Granny's sideboard and clock. Do you know, I've got a friend called John, clergyman, and he took a funeral, and during the funeral, one of the members of the family removed from the parental home what they wanted during the funeral through the removal van. Can I advise you not to do that? Puts a bit of a shadow over Christmas. Can you imagine? So this guy is absorbed by possessions. He can't be doing with Jesus' teaching. So Jesus says, have a look back down, let's have a look at the story. Jesus replied, man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you? Then he said, watch out. The word watch out is the word you'd shout for a lorry hitting you. Watch out. It's a sign. Away. Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life doesn't consist in the abundance of possessions. And then Jesus tells this parable. And he tells it to make this very angry guy he's got a writ in his pocket that he's against his own brother. And Jesus tells this story to make the guy maybe just put the writ back in his pocket and say, okay, let me just think. Let me just think about what's really important here. So let's have a look at the story in the light of that. So here we go, the story kicks off. There we go, verse 16. And he told them this parable, this story with a spiritual cutting edge that I hope you'll never forget. Certainly for me, the first time I read it, it seared itself into my consciousness. Yeah, a few words, but so striking. He told them this parable. The ground of a certain man yielded an abundant harvest. So this guy knows exactly how to work the EU subsidies. I think that's what's left of them. The stables have been converted into garages. There are 4 or 5 family cars. All the kids have got cars. Whatever the insurance is, they've all got them. I guess in city terms, he's one of thousands who'd commute in from Surrey, probably lives on the Wentworth estate or something like that. He'd be sitting in the first class reading the Financial Times. And there'd be another house up in Mayfair, not just a flat, but a house. Probably one of the hedge fund guys who works in Chelsea or in the West End. His kids, I don't know where they'd be, Eton, Harrow, Downhouse. Oh, by the way, if you're there this evening, welcome. Lovely to have you. Great. His wife shops at Harrods or Harvey Nicks. He drives an Aston Martin. And if you'd have passed him, as you went past the carriage, you'd have nudged the person next to him and looked across and said, he's made a fortune, even in the recession. Since 2008, he's made money. He's not just kept his money, which is the objective in the recession. He's made money. He's no fool. Look at him. And so what happens? Verses 17 and 18, can we see as we look down to this guy? He thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Then he said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I'll store my surplus grain. So you see, he gets a bigger harvest than he expected one year, but there's no panic, there's no waste. He's not going to flood the market. He gets out his calculator, he does his sums, he works out the right course of action. He sees it's definitely worth paying for a massive grain storage mountain. Waste not, want not, that's what his mum taught him. So there's a bigger profit this year, and he is not going to let George Osborne get his hands on it. So he calls in his accountant and he works out how to invest it, and then, having planned and worked and thought and planned and worked and thought, the amazing thing is that at last, after years of work, he arrives at verse 19. Verse 19, he's there. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. Well, ever since getting to Queen's College at Oxford, he'd always dreamed of that. I mentioned Queen's. I used to play rugby for them when I was here. So if you're from Queen's, welcome. But he'd always dreamed about this guy. Ever since he was an undergraduate, 19 years old. He read his Longfellow. The heights by great men reached and kept were not attained by sudden flight. But they, while their contemporaries slept, laboured upward in the night. And he had worked. And he'd said, by my mid-40s, I'll retire and I will be free. I'll have everything paid for. And now, he's done it. Most people don't make it, but mid-40s, he's retired with everything he needs for the future. Absolute freedom from what he's earned. So he retires at 47. And doubtless the Sunday Times colour supplement would write an article on him entitled "The Man Who Knew When to Stop." And everyone sitting in their front rooms in suburbia would read this, and they'd nod and they'd say, very wise, very wise. And now he's a member of 2 golf clubs, member of Sunningdale, down near London, but also a member of Royal St George's on the Kent coast. He's got a house near, Wentworth Estate, house near that. Got a lovely house he's built down on the Kent coast at Royal St George's with a yacht in the bay overlooking at it. And it's just amazing. He's done it. He's going to get to single figures on both courses. You probably need to be retired to be able to do that. And you see, that's what makes verse 20 so brutal. You see, the retirement party's come and gone. It's been on a Sunday lunch down on the Kent coast, and all his mates are flogging back up to the city to work, and they just say, the applause are ringing in his ears. They say, "You've done it." And he's standing on the veranda with a long, cool glass of, what do you think, orange juice? And he sits there and he looks behind at this massive house he's built. He sees the house in the bay. He thinks of the house in Mayfair, the house on the Wentworth. And he says to himself as he looks down and he sees magazines. And there are safaris, there are skiing holidays. He's decided that he's going to buy a chalet in Verbier because he doesn't want to do this timeshare stuff where you don't know if the snow's going to be good. No, he wants to go when the snow's great. So he's buying a chalet. And there are safaris. He's going to go to the Aberdares in Kenya. It's going to be amazing. And he says to himself, "You've done it. You've done it. You've retired early. You've plentied it up for years and years and years. Take life easy. Eat, drink." And suddenly there is a searing pain in his chest, and he is dead before they get him to intensive care in Canterbury. Verse 20, can you see? "But God said to him, 'You fool, you fool. This very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you've prepared for yourself?' Well, they hold a memorial service for him at Queen's College. He'd been an amazing benefactor. They hold another one for him in the city, and the chairman will say what a loyal servant of the company he was. The trade journal will say what an example he was to his profession. But can I say, God says again to him, 'You fool.' Now, I've taken funerals of men like this, and my godfather was killed on the 6th of August, 1982, and he was like this. Been to the Olympics, made money in shipping. I worship the ground he stood on. And suddenly he's gone. And again, the reason I raise this is that no one in my family had ever, I was 16 years old, talked to me about death. I don't know about your family, it was a total taboo subject. Never raised. And suddenly this person who was a linchpin, a cornerstone of the family, is gone. We'll never see him again. He's fallen off a cliff. So he had a yacht, he went for a walk on a small island, he slipped on a cliff path as he was trying to climb over a tree stump. A tree had fallen, trying to climb over it, slipped to his death. He's gone. First time I saw my father in tears. And no answers. And I'm a clergyman, I took a funeral of a young woman who'd been killed in a car crash called Kathy. And an old lady said to me, "Do you know what failure is at this funeral?" I said, "No." She said, "Failure is being successful at the things that don't matter. Failure is being successful at the things that don't matter." Well, the lawyers tied it up it all. Mostly it went to a son who was, he just liked windsurfing. So he spent the whole inheritance on windsurfing around the world. Windsurfing's great, but it's all he did. Broke his mother's heart. What about the eternal world? All was lost. Now, I don't know what you make of this little story, but do you reckon it might have made the brother take the writ and put it in his pocket and think and stop about really what's important in life? And I want to say this guy made 2 fatal mistakes, and let me draw your attention to them now. 2 fatal mistakes about what constitutes, ladies and gentlemen, success in life. And again, at 16 in my family, torpedoed by this myself. I don't think I've never met anyone who wants to fail. I don't think anyone here wants to fail. We want to be successful. Well, this guy made 2 fatal mistakes. And his first fatal mistake, according to Jesus here, in this biography by Dr. Luke, is that he lived as though God was not there. So we don't know much about this guy. We don't know if he was a good husband or a philanderer. We don't know if he was a good father or he beat his children. All we know is that verse 21, the end of it, he was not rich towards God. Now, this is the issue. I don't doubt, coming from the culture he did in those days, that actually if you'd said to him, "Do you believe in God?" done a microphone, a vox pop, he'd have said, "Of course. He said, you should see the views down in Sandwich where my holiday house is. You should see it. You should see the sea. Oh yeah, I believe in God. But he lived as though God didn't exist. So he'd say, actually, I'm not so much Youve, Church of England, I'm more Andy, Christmas and Easter. That's what he'd say. And do you see, although he maybe believed in God, actually the focus is absolutely elsewhere. Have a look down, 17 and 8 where. Do you see, my, or myself comes 11 times here, just how self-centered he was, even if he did believe in God. What shall I do? 17, I've no place to store my crops. Then he said, this is what I'll do. I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. There I'll store my surplus grain, and I'll say to myself, you've plenty of grain laid up for many years. Absolutely self-centered. He thought he was self-sufficient. Now, it's amazing, actually, if you read the Old Testament, the Jews to whom Jesus told this story, they knew what you did with wealth. Wealth was a gift. The ability to make money was a gift. And therefore, if you had wealth, you helped the orphan, you helped the widow, you helped the stranger. You don't say, what shall I do with it? You're generous with it. That's what you're told to do. But this guy is absolutely self-contained, totally selfish. Samuel Butler wrote about two very selfish people called Mr. and Mrs. Carlyle. He said this, how good of God to cause Carlyle and Mrs. Carlyle to marry one another and so make two people miserable instead of four. This guy's absolutely locked in on himself. And he's got three things. Do you see? Treasure, plenty of good things, 19, verse 19. He's got leisure, take life easy. He's got pleasure, eat, drink, and be merry. But God, the giver of those things, I guess if you pushed him, he'd say, God, really? Well, he's on the back burner. In fact, this is sexist. Please forgive me, ladies, this is sexist. He'd probably, if you'd have pushed him a bit more, said, religion? Really? Wife and kids. Not for me. I'm a man. I'm an alpha male. I don't need it. I prefer to spend Sunday morning on the golf course. I'm a man. I don't need religion. But it's good for the wife and kids. It's a nice handrail for them. Not me, though. People like me don't need it. Look at the house I've got. Look at my house in Mayfair. I'm strong. I don't need it. But it's good for other people. So he lived as if God wasn't there. And God says to him, what a fool you are. What a fool you are. Why? Because God is there. And because he has shown himself. Now I was on my day off, and my mother, who was always known affectionately in the family as the Ayatollah, so you could never countermand her, but my mother said to me, darling, we're off to a wedding, so is your brother and sister-in-law, so you're here to babysit the kids. So there were 3 kids, 8, 6, and a little girl of 4. I'll tell you what, I was babysitting from 10 in the morning till 7 in the evening. Honestly, it was absolutely full on. Eating was mayhem. We visited the ducks, we played rugby, we played cricket, we played football. Bath time, someone should have told me it's helpful if you mostly take your own clothes off as well. I got absolutely drenched at bath time. Anyway, in the afternoon, about 4 o'clock, her brothers were asleep. Lena, she wanted to play a game. I said, oh, Lena, I'd like to play a game. What do you want to play? She said, I'd like to play hide and seek. I said, Lena, how do you play? Now, the reason for that is this, is that I've found that when you're playing games with little ones, you need to get the rules clear. Because otherwise, if there is a ruling in the middle of the game, it tends to go against you. So I said, Lena, how do you play? She said, it's easy. It's easy. You shut your eyes and count to 10. I go and hide behind the dining room door, then you come and find me. I said, Lena, have I got that clear? She said, yeah. I said, I shut my eyes, I count to 10, you hide behind the dining room door. She said, those are the rules. I counted to 10. I said, I finished, and she shouted, ready, from behind the dining room door. I said, is Lena underneath the kitchen table? Howls of laughter from behind the dining room door. Is Lena underneath Mummy and Daddy's bed? Howls of laughter from behind the dining room door. Is she behind the dining room door? And she shot out as though she was spring-loaded. I said, what do we do now? She said, I'm going upstairs to hide underneath Mummy and Daddy's bed. You need to count to 10 and then come and find me. Now, you see, the issue is, and I realised this as time went on, that in the family, she'd been given the impression that her uncle was such a thick idiot that she needed to keep speaking, otherwise 3 months later, a skeleton would be pulled from underneath Mummy and Daddy's bed. And the thing about hide and seek is, it's not hiding that's fun, it's being found. So you've got to keep speaking. And I want to say, when it comes to God, he has spoken to us. He's spoken. I don't come from a Christian family. This was amazing to me. He's spoken to us. And, can I say, he has spoken to us about his son, Jesus Christ. And he says, what do you make of my son? And then he says this, he says, and I've sent my son so that you can be in relationship with me. He says, I've sent my son so that you can find friendship with me. What do you make of him? When I took my friend Harry's funeral, I spoke from a passage. And this just shows how utterly central I find friendship with Jesus Christ. So through the tears, I did this. I then, at my own mother's funeral, spoke from the same passage 18 months ago. It's in Luke's Gospel, but I spoke from Mark's Gospel, so this is what it was. So this is Mark chapter 5, and I just want to say this is why life can never be the same without Jesus. This is why, for me, friendship with him is utterly central. Let me read this to you. When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered round him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue rulers named Jairus came there. Seeing Jesus, he fell at his feet. Now that's an extraordinary thing. Here's the local judge, the local headmaster, and he falls at the feet of who? A Galilean carpenter. Why? What's he doing? And he says, my little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so she'll be healed and live. Well, that's the reason. The worst funerals I've taken, actually rather like Harry, are when you take the funerals of children, of young people, and the parents are there. I took a funeral of a little boy called Max who went to bed with a cold, but it was a virus. It had sort of attacked his lungs overnight. And in the morning, his parents went to get him, first son, and he'd gone. He died. And Chris and Sonia were in the front row, and I took this funeral, and they were, sort of British middle-class people. They were wailing. They were wailing with grief. Wailing. So this man is just desperate, Jairus, and he's on the floor, and his daughter, she says to him, Daddy, I'm very sick, and he's always looked after her, he's always cared for her. And she says, Daddy, I'm sick. He says, I know. She says, no, Daddy, I don't think you understand. I'm very sick. And so he is desperate, and he throws himself at the feet of a Galilean carpenter. Now, if Jesus is just a Galilean carpenter, what can he do? Well, he can make a coffin. He can say, oh, Mr. Jairus, don't you worry, I've got some lovely mahogany wood. Why don't you come with me? She'll look lovely in the coffin. But the question is he more than that? Is he more than a carpenter? Well, Jairus says, my little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so she'll be healed and live. And then on we go in Mark's Gospel. Again, it's in Luke. But then verse 35, later in Mark chapter 5. While Jesus was still speaking, some men came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue ruler. Your daughter's dead, they said. Why bother the teacher anymore? Honestly, don't you think they need a pastoral skills course? Don't you reckon? You're not going to have them working for Nightline, are you? She's dead. Why bother them anymore? I mean, where are they from? Yorkshire? Are they Australian? I mean, what's wrong? Sorry, if you're Yorkshire, welcome if you're from those places. Verse 36, ignoring what they said, Jesus told the synagogue ruler, don't be afraid, just believe. Can I tell you, you've got to be pretty sure of your guns to say that. When I buried Max, I didn't do any jokes with Chris and Sonia. Don't be afraid, just believe. I used to be a youth worker in the inner city of Liverpool, and the club kids there used to say, don't write cheques with your mouth, your body can't cash. This is a big cheque. Don't be afraid, just believe. He better be more than a carpenter. On we go. He didn't let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue ruler, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, why all this commotion and wailing? The child's not dead but asleep. But they laughed at him, and that is the sarcastic laugh of the playground. How dare you? How dare you play games with these parents? She's dead. How dare you? After he put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him, and he went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, Talitha cum, which means, little girl, I say to you, get up. Immediately the girl stood up and walked around. She was 12 years old. At this they were completely astonished. Now what Mark is telling us here is this, is that just as you and I can wake the sleeping, Jesus, because he is the Lord and Master of the world, he is God's King, he can raise the dead. And so I said at my friend's funeral, and I said at my mother's funeral, I said, the question is, will we put our hand into the hand of Jesus in the face of death? Because Jesus lived and taught, and he had a band of followers, and he was tried in a Roman and Jewish court, and he was sentenced to die, and they strung him up on a cross, and they put a spear through his side, and they took him off the cross, and they certified him as dead, and they put him in the tomb, and 3 days later he was walking around again. Now here's the issue. If he got through death himself, he can get me through. And that means at my mother's funeral, I said what I did say when she died. In intensive care, I said to her, I said, goodbye, we'll all say that. I said, I love you, we'll all say that to loved ones. And then I said, because of Jesus, I'll see you again. I'll see you again. Now, I can't tell you, that is worth more to me than, I promise you, all the money in the world. And so Jesus comes, and God says, what do you make of my son? For example, here's the answer to death. He's risen. And he says he's come so that you can be in friendship with me. But more than that, he's come and he has to die because, you see, what we've done is we have ignored him. In his world, we've ignored and used him. We've taken the gifts, we've ignored the giver. I hate it when people do that to me. So there is this need of Good Friday when Jesus dies so I can be forgiven. So he doesn't just come so that we can be in friendship with him. He dies to make that friendship possible. A friend of mine called John was visiting a church, and he was staying in a home, and on the fridge was the picture of a baby. And he said, who's the baby? And the couple there said, oh, we've had a tragedy. They said, that is a little boy, just born, and the mum, they lived in a flat, put him out on the drive just to get a little bit of sun, and she didn't tell the husband, and he reversed the car over his own son, and the boy died. And I tell you that because it's so shocking. We're not shocked by the death of Jesus. It's an extraordinary thing that God allows his son to die. That little baby was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Jesus intentionally says, I'm going to die to make friendship with God possible. When he's strung up on the cross, he pays in death and blood so that I can be forgiven. And yet the family I come from, let me tell you my family, I love them dearly, but they say, listen, Rico, we'll be accepted by God because we're decent people. Well, why did God send his son to die then, if being decent is good enough? We're good people. Why did he send him to die? Does it really matter? He sent him to die. It must matter. So it's a staggering thing. And this man lives without reference to God. And God says, that makes you a failure. Let me draw to a close. I've got one more point here, if we can come back to Luke's Gospel, because this guy lives as though there's no God. But secondly, he also lives, and again, I want to be straight, there's no spin. And again, I want people to give me information. If you give me the information, it shows me you care. So that's where my heart is as I give you this. But have a look down here. You see, it's very striking, verse 20. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. This guy doesn't just live as though there's no judgment. He also lives as though there's no God. He also lives as though there's no judgment. Can I say there is a day of judgment? And can I say that unashamedly? It's a great thing there's a day of judgment. Here is a man, he had all his wealth, he did nothing for those around him. When he said, what shall I do with my wealth? Can I say again, the Bible was crystal clear. What about the widows? What about the orphans? What about the stranger? The ability to make money has been given you by God so that you use it for others. Doesn't even think that. Uses the gifts absolutely for himself. And God says, well, there's a day of reckoning. Not only what have you done with me, but what have you done with the wealth I gave you? You were meant to be a steward of it. So unashamedly can I say there's a judgment, and the resurrection of Jesus, the fact he rises from the dead, proves that we'll be raised and judged. A lot of you will know this, but actually last week was the Holocaust Memorial Day, and there were some people who told stories of being in Auschwitz and losing relatives. And one woman said this as she got off. I read this in a magazine yesterday. One woman said this. She got off the train at Auschwitz. Her mother and her younger siblings were killed. What is that? Is it a factory? And they told us, the guards, no, that is where they burn your parents and the children who you came with. That's what she was told. That's how she was told. Her parents and her younger siblings were dead. It's a great thing there's a judgment to come. At every level. It means how I treat you matters to God, how you treat me matters to God, how we treat the world matters to God. But this guy, you see, he lived as though there was no judgment, and he lived as though he had so much time. Do you see verse 19? And I'll say to myself, you've plenty of grain laid up for many years. But he was fresh out of time. So I've buried 9 school friends, 9. And then here's my best friend from university. And I stood at his graveside, Harry, and I said these words, tears in my eyes, from Psalm 103. As for man, his days are like grass. He flourishes like a flower of the field, but the wind blows its place and remembers no more. We flourish, but it's over so quickly. Life is so fleeting. He thought he had many years. He was fresh out of time. So as I close, and can I say, yes, it is a devastating parable, but it's given to us because God cares for us. It's a devastating parable, but can I ask, is your life successful by these standards? In terms of what I've done with friendship with God, God hates to call us failures. He longs to call us his friends. He longs to make us his sons and daughters through what Christ has done. And for me, what happened to me is I came to understand this and understand the resurrection of Christ and the wonder of forgiveness. For me, honestly, this is how it got. Let's just end with this. Are you ready? Coming? Oh. And back, chance to shine. Oh. Oh dear. Don't leave me. Oh, that's quite well done. Yeah, well done. And coming? Oh, very good hands. And back? Oh, well done there, President. Do you know what? I was once at a wedding, and I threw a ball up the church, and as I let go, I had a sense of foreboding. There was an 82-year-old woman called Mrs. Mott. She was wearing a blue hat, and I nailed her. And I'm not kidding. She went one way, her blue hat went the other. I thought I've killed her with my visual aid. And they wrote and complained. They wrote to my vicar and complained about this behaviour. He wrote back and said, he's a very immature young man. Please pray for us as we train him. Anyway, let's now do it. Let's now do it without the ball. And back. And back. Do you know, can I say, what I've come to see is this. As I've buried 9 school friends, as I hold the funeral card of my best friend from university, I've come to see this. Christ becomes as central to life as a ball is to a game. To not know him is to go through the motions. One reason is life is so short. He gives us all the gifts. He comes to die so that we can be in friendship with God. It's the most extraordinary thing to know him. It's amazing to stand at your mother's funeral and be able to say, not just goodbye and I love you, but also, I'll see you again. He is as central to life as a ball is to a game. The most important information I got in 10 years at school was the information I got about Jesus Christ. And our plea is that you'll find friendship with him. And can I say, to push you along in that, I just want to say, is it really true? And could it be true that failure is being successful at the things that don't matter? Life is so short. Failure is being successful at the things that don't matter. Well, we'd love you to come back this week. I'm going to be, again, speaking from the parables of Jesus. I think you'll find each night they are electrifying. But thank you so much for coming tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Rico. I'm sure many of you have some questions regarding the talk, and the number, as you can see, is on all the screens around the venue. So I recommend that you text in your questions right now so your question gets asked in a few minutes. And we're now going to invite up Karis, who's going to be sharing her story about how she became a Christian and how Jesus has changed her life. Can we all give her a hand as well?
Hello. Hi, I'm Karis, and I'm a first-year mathematician at St. Hugh's. If you'd have told me 2 years ago that I would be telling you why I love Jesus, I would have probably laughed at you. I grew up in a very non-Christian family, and the only time I heard about God was on the rare occasions that my primary school dragged me to church. During my childhood, I don't remember ever thinking that God could exist. In my eyes, those who believed in stories about Noah or Moses or Jesus were on the same intellectual level as those who believed in Santa and the Tooth Fairy. From an early age, I identified myself as an atheist with no desire to find out more or correct any misconceptions I may have had about Christianity. So you may have already guessed, but something changed. In the Christmas holidays in 2010, my older sister, who's also my best friend, came home from her first term at university claiming that she was a Christian. I laughed at her a lot. It got a bit awkward when I realised that she wasn't actually joking. At first I didn't really care because it was going to be a phase and it surely wouldn't concern me. I'm not sure if you've realised, but Christians like to talk about Jesus a lot. It started to get a little bit old, so I naturally decided I needed to put an end to it. So I started to challenge her views and try and catch her out, but the more discussions we had, the more I realised I wasn't going to be able to put together a good argument against Christianity unless I actually looked into it. So after 17 years of rejecting the idea of God, I ended up spending most of my time reading about this guy called Jesus. Admittedly, it served as excellent procrastination from revision. The more I looked into it, the more questions I had, and apparently I wasn't the first person to ask these questions. I was amazed to see how Christianity and science fitted perfectly together. As time went on, I began to understand Christianity and what it meant. It didn't mean giving up a fun and exciting life to follow some boring rules. It meant realising that you're not perfect and that God's standards are so high that no one could possibly get through life without breaking one of his laws. This same God offered freedom though. He had sent his son Jesus Christ down to die for our sins that we could stand perfectly before God. All Christians had to do was accept this amazing forgiveness. This sounded great, so I started to go along to my sister's church with her and was genuinely shocked at how normal the people were. What shocked me even more, that was in church, I met really intelligent people. It turns out that church doesn't have a sign saying, "Leave your brain at the door and come on in." After spending time with these Christians, I started to notice how much joy they had and a faith in this amazing God. I just could not cross the barrier of suddenly believing in a God. I wanted God to physically come and show me that he was there. I read more and more and was searching for a logical, scientific proof. After a few months of wanting to be a Christian, I went to church with my sister again. We, being everyone but me, was singing a song called The Stand. I stood awkwardly and listened. The lyrics that have stuck with me since that day are, "So I'll stand with my arms high and heart abandoned." Because although in my head I still seemed to want the certainty of proof, I realised that at some point God had opened my heart to him. That night I was crying on the floor with my sister, and for the first time I prayed, and I chose to give my life to Jesus Christ. I kind of expected after that moment that my life would suddenly be simple, and everything I prayed for God would give me. Well, what actually happened was that my friends thought of me as the boring Christian. My relationship with my strongly atheist mum fell to pieces, and to top things off, my parents decided to file for a divorce. I was really angry at God. Surely he'd be happy with me now that I'd accepted him into my life. So in the Bible, you'll find the book of Psalms, and in chapter 20, verse 7, it says, "Some trust in chariots and some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God." I found it's really easy to place my identity in things like a solid family, friends, or getting a first. But these things don't always last. It was then that I knew that I needed to place my confidence, security, and trust in God. From that point on, although things in my family were worse than they'd ever been, I felt more loved and complete than I ever had before. I had a relationship with an unchanging, forgiving, and loving God. The God that I, as a Christian believer, knows I'm not perfect. He sees me messing up day after day. He watched me actively reject him for years. I do not deserve his love, and I never will, but that doesn't change the fact that it's there. I still have so many questions that maybe I'll never have answers to, but for one thing I know for certain is that trusting in Jesus Christ was the best thing I've ever done, and I'll never look back. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Karis. That was really moving. Just to say, we're going to have the Q&A session now. So if you've got any more questions, please text them in. And I'm now going to invite Rico up, who's going to lead the Q&A. And we've got 3 others who are going to be on the Q&A panel. And so, Rico, could you now and do that?
Oh, no. Hope they'll want that one.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, that's right.
Hi. Great. So some questions going to come up, bro? Or shall I make some up?
Yeah, they're up
Ah, there we go. So, shall I just introduce the panel?
Yeah.
So, do you want to introduce yourselves? That would be great.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Phil Jack. I work for a church just down the street there called St Ev's Church with students most of the time.
Exactly the same, except for I'm not Phil Jack, I'm Sharon Mack.
Yeah.
I'm very similar. I work with students here at St Aldate's, and I'm Laura Gallagher.
Great. Well, let's have the first question then. I agree that it is a good thing that there's a judgment for Holocaust murderers, etc., but surely I'm not on the same level as them. Phil, any thoughts on that?
Thank you very much. I guess by what standard are we judging by what standard are we judging our behaviour, our goodness, if you like? And it's very easy to sort of take a standard of actions and compare ourselves to a murderer and say, I'm not as bad as them. But how does God judge the way that we act? And he does that relationally with regards to how we treat him. So I want you to imagine somebody and maybe one of your lecturers, and you meet him for tutes every week, and he seems like a very charming man. He's polite, he's friendly, he offers you tea every week, and you know, he seems like a great guy. You know that he does a lot of work with charity, you know that he's very intelligent, you know he teaches you very well, and you think he's great. But then you find out that he beats his wife regularly. And you think, well, that guy in the relationship that matters most is an absolute disgrace. And all the other stuff counts for nothing because of the way he treats his wife. Now apply that kind of thought to our relationship with God. And we could be the most outwardly moral people in the world, and we could do lots of good stuff. But in the relationship that matters most, if we push God out and ignore him, we're a disgrace. And that's why when God judges us, he'll judge us first and foremost of how we've related to him, and then on how we've related to others in his world. So that's the kind of how I begin to work that question out. It's a good question, it's a hard one, but...
Great. Any additions? Great. I think that's great, Phil. Yeah, I think it's deciding that at the heart of human sin is deciding that I'll be God. Now, appallingly, the Holocaust is the extreme example of that. But if you choose to beat your wife, you're saying, I'll make up the rules, I'll decide here. And that's the heart of sin, saying, look, actually, shove off God, I'm in charge, no to your rules. Sin. Shove off God, I'm in charge, no to your rules. I'll be the one that decides. And that's what we're accountable for. Next question. I know there'll be lots of stuff coming out of these, so again, do come back. There's the conversation. Tim will explain in a moment what that can be. Next question. That'd be great. If Jesus really is as central to life as you make out, how come I feel fine without him? Great question. Shall I throw something out just at the start of that? I've got friends, and God has given them so many gifts. He's lavished his gifts upon them, and I don't begrudge them this. I think they love life, and they love life without God. My friend Harry, who died very suddenly of a pulmonary embolism, loved life. I just lost him when he was 35. So I'm saying I think God can lavish so many gifts upon you, and then if you've got any wisdom, you run your life according to the laws he gives, and I think people have a great life, but they take the gifts, they ignore him. So my friend Harry suddenly was, in that place where he'd gone, and there wasn't hope. It was desperate. But I think you can have God's gifts lavished upon you, ignore the giver, and have a very happy time. So the Bible says at the funeral, you flourish, but then you're gone. So yeah, I am talking about eternity here, because some people have got the gifts to manage very well until eternity. Anything add on that, Sean or Laura?
Maybe just one thought for me in following Jesus, which is important here, is that he said that he came, he says this in John's Gospel, chapter 10, verse 10, that he came to give life, and life to the full. And I would definitely say that whilst perhaps we can feel fine in some ways in enjoying some of the gifts that God has given us in this world, and many good things, that actually perhaps another part of this question is that there is a life actually in all of its fullness that is on offer in relationship with the Lord Jesus, in knowing our Creator God, and in experiencing the reality of that as we know Him and grow in Him. So rather than maybe just being fine, maybe there's an offer for you this evening to know actually life how it was always made for you to live it in its fullness, with complete joy and love and peace, etc., as it says in the Bible.
Super, thanks. Lots of questions will come out of this. We'll talk about how we can keep that conversation going. On we go. Next question. Is it possible to be driven and financially successful and a Christian?
Yes. Well, if you've been picking up, if you came at lunchtime and tonight, that I think it was at lunchtime, Vaughn said that God made matter, and so matter is important to him, the physical stuff. In fact, he made everything. So there's not a secular and spiritual divide. We don't divide things like that if we read the Bible. So God, in that sense, gives all the gifts and then gives us the ability to enjoy the gifts. But the problem comes, as Rico said earlier, is when we take the gifts and the ability to enjoy them. So we take the money and the drive that goes behind making that and enjoying that and using that and investing that, but we reject the one who gives it. And so the word Christian means Christ follower. And so a Christ follower is taking the gifts and the ability to enjoy it and then worshipping, which means thanking, appreciating, honouring the one who gives all of that. And that will have specific impact on how you use your money, and the drive behind it. What is associated with money? Does it define you? Does it give you your worth? So of course, being a Christian will radically affect all of your approach to that and what you do with it. But it is possible to be financially successful and driven and follow the Lord Jesus Christ.
Super. Next question. Phil, do you want to add anything in that? Right.
We're still on this one, a better answer.
How can you be sure that heaven is real and that you'll see your lost loved ones again? I suppose that's for me. The resurrection, that past certainty that Christ rose from the dead, is what gives me the future hope. So again, as I look at the resurrection, I think that's historically provable. That is what allows me to think, well, if he got through death, he can get me through. So there's a verse in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, one of Paul's letters, that says, basically, Christ died, Christ rose, Christians die, Christians rise. So there's a parallelism between the two. And I think that the God who made the world can recreate the world. In terms of heaven, just to say, a lot of people have got this view of heaven where it's these, Laura Ashley in a nightie on the clouds. I don't know about you, but I won't look my best in Laura Ashley. And, just to say, the new creation is very physical. So Christians believe that we're getting our bodies back and we're coming back here to this world. So the new creation is back here. It's a very physical thing. So this sort of wafty thing of heaven, which I think causes people to go, look, I can't get my head around it. Can I say, no, you die, your spirit goes to be with Christ, but he'll come back here in his resurrection body, and Christians will come back in their resurrection bodies. So heaven will be back here, the new heaven, the new earth, but without the mess. Often in London I say tooting won't be there. There'll be no tooting. Sorry, So, but it will be a joyous thing. So it's the resurrection that gives me, that past certainty gives me a future hope. I think that's such a crucial one. Anything to add on that?
I think also it's the promise of Jesus Christ as well. So he has been raised, and he then says, I will take you to be with me, and I will come back for you. And the question is, will you take Jesus Christ at his word? Is he trustworthy? And the whole point of his life, one of the whole points of his life, is to demonstrate his trustworthiness and his faithfulness to his promises. And the Christian life is living a life trusting him to do what he said he will do, as he's demonstrated he can do, which is Rico's point.
Great. Next question. How can you believe that God loves people when he sends people to hell? Great question. Let me hand that one over.
Well, maybe I'll start and maybe these guys can then build on that. I think that it's important to say that anger, which is what is behind God's justice and the concept of his punishing people, anger is not the opposite of love. Hate is the opposite of love. Hate is related to indifference. So when you're hurt by somebody, and particularly somebody who you love and you think loves you, when you're hurt by them, you are angry. That pain, that anger is a right response to when we have injustice or evil in our lives. And that is the response of God to the world, which is full of evil. It's right that he is not happy with that and that he wants to do something about that. And so his love is expressed in his anger towards evil in the world. And then the question is raised, well, hell as a response to that, is hell the right response to that? Well, in one sense, who are we to judge what is the right response to how we have treated God in his world? In lots of descriptions of hell in the Bible, one of them is being outside of the presence of God. And so I'm not sure who it was that said this, but if we've got a choice, we can either say to God, in this life, thy will be done, or in the next life, God says to us, thy will be done, which is saying to God, I don't want you in my life, and he honours that choice with hell, which is not having him in our life, away from the source of all goodness and love and joy and peace. And that's why the Bible's descriptions are so vivid and so graphic and so disturbing, because to be away from God's presence, to be without him is awful. And so that's why Jesus is so adamant to do all you can to avoid that prospect. Do you want to add to that?
Just to pick up on what you said, that while we still have the chance, it is a powerful challenge, because I heard someone else say it, that God is a gentleman in that he won't force that decision upon you, but he invites you, but he'll honour your decision. And so in that sense, where there's a great responsibility in that.
Great question, and a huge issue to look at. And on Wednesday night in Luke's Gospel, that comes up in the parable Jesus we've got for Wednesday night. So we'll be picking that up again. And massive question. One more question? Last question. Why should God... Which one are we going to do here? Why did Jesus... you're going to keep changing them here. I'm a dyslexic fool. Here we go. Why did Jesus need to die to make friendship with God possible? How can his death fix my problem?
Okay. This is a huge question which I think all of us need to say something on, because this is the central claim of the Christian faith that will be talked about again and again as we look at the cross. So why did Jesus need to die to make friendship with God possible? One thing that we will hear again and again throughout this week is that there is a problem which needs to be fixed, and that is our sin. And that is understood in the Bible as something which separates us from God and from knowing him, where basically we would decide to turn our back on God as the giver of life and go it in our own way. And therefore we need someone who is without sin to come and to take our place and to make it possible for us to know God and to know relationship with him again. And Jesus Christ, as the man who God himself came to earth, was that innocent one who could step in for us and take our place and be our substitute, as it were, on the cross, and make it possible, therefore, for us to know relationship with God. Part 1.
Part 2, because God's justice needs to be done, and so he lovingly, in his divine love and grace, takes the punishment in himself in the person of Jesus Christ. So on the cross, Jesus Christ is dying in the place of those people like you and I who deserve to be rejected by God, but he's rejected instead of us. That's how the problem's fixed, because God's justice is satisfied in Jesus Christ and not in me. And so I can be free and know certain forgiveness, because I know that my sin has been dealt with once and for all by Jesus Christ on the cross. that's how the problem's fixed. And that's how it makes friendships possible. I mean, you could say lots more of that. I'm sure Rico will be saying lots in the week as the week goes by. Sharon, do you want to?
Just that we were hearing the other day about it's so radical, you need to start over. So to pick up on what they've said, Jesus' righteous, his justice needed to be perfectly paid for, and so it had to be someone perfect to fix the problem, and that's the claim that Jesus made. But also it had to be someone that had experienced the full love and intimacy that Laura talked about, so part of God himself, the Trinity, so that we could then be back in that perfect and intimate love again. So the justice and the love meet both in the Lord Jesus Christ.
Great. No, that's great. Just to say, everyone, that the sin issue, this little religious word, it is a massive issue. If you're not persuaded of that, we really don't pass go. So getting your head around what Christians think about sin and then why Christ had to come is just, front and centre of understanding God's love. If you get that, then suddenly his grace becomes amazing. So it's just crucial for the communication. Lovely. Tim.